Hello everyone, I'm Danny Roddy of DannyRoddy.com, and I just published a new article on my weblog entitled Antihistamines for Pattern Hair Loss? Before we get into it, I wanted to thank my patrons for making this article and all of the content I produce possible. You can go to patreon.com/DannyRoddy, which is the sole means of support for all the content produced on the Danny Roddy weblog, and you can head over there if you feel compelled to do so. Also, check out facebook.com/the Danny Roddy weblog, where I post content Monday through Friday. Also, a huge backlog of bite-sized information can be found there as well. With that out of the way, let's get into this week's article. Over the years, a few people have been interested in the ability of antihistamine drugs to completely reverse baldness. For instance, in a small group of 10 women with so-called androgenic alopecia, an antihistamine called Cimetidine showed good to excellent regrowth of hair in 7 out of 10 women. In addition to hair regrowth, acne, seborrhea, hirsutism, which were present in 3 of the patients, showed significant improvement. Most of the women said that the scalp had become less greasy, similar to Hamilton's famous immune to baldness castrates. Around the same time, it was recorded that another antihistamine drug, benoxaprofen, was able to spontaneously reverse baldness in 2 men. The first case was a 75-year-old man with hereditary male pattern baldness since he was 45. After 5 months of antihistamine treatment, the gentleman noticed new hairs on previously bald areas of his scalp. The other case, a 45-year-old man who had been balding in a patterned fashion since he was 40, experienced an increased growth of hair over the area of scalp previously lacking hair after 9 months of taking benoxaprofen. Cetirizine is another antihistamine drug that is currently being explored on various hair loss forms as an anti-inflammatory. Unfortunately, similar to cimetidine and benoxaprofen, cetirizine has a host of gnarly side effects that exclude it from being useful in the long term. A historical treatment for baldness that hints at a more physiological approach to controlling mast cell degranulation and the subsequent release of histamine is cyproterone acetate. Cyproterone acetate has a semi-successful track record for resolving hair loss orally as well as topically in both men and women. While the drug is commonly referred to as an anti-androgen, it opposes estrogen to castration levels and exerts a progesterone-like effect. Estrogen has long been known to activate mast cells, while progesterone, working in the opposite direction, quiets them. Although some of the studies attempting to explain the positive effect of antihistamines on hair growth have attributed it to their alleged anti-androgenic actions, specious at best in the case of cimetidine, I have a different take. The defining feature of pattern hair loss is a higher ratio of telogen, resting, to anagen, growing hairs. I think this reframes the conversation away from androgens and the genes and helps refocus thinking about the complicated growth cycle of the hair follicle and its interaction with the environment. In physiological amounts, histamine appears to play an important role in the cyclical growth of hair. For example, in the energetically expensive early anagen growth phase, the skin content of histamine in mast cell granules is high, promoting quick glycolytic growth. However, when hair follicles reach late anagen, a gradual but radical decrease in histamine begins and the mast cell population diminishes by 1/3, leading to a more differentiated state of growth. During the resting telogen phase of hair growth, the mast cells and histamine increase again and continue rising in the subsequent anagen, preparing the hair for the next growth phase. If histamine is tightly regulated during stages of early anagen, turned off during the differentiated state of late anagen, and increased once again during the resting telogen phase, we might expect an excess of histamine and other mast cell products to retard normal growth. While I'm not aware of any direct research on the histamine levels of people with pattern baldness, some pieces of evidence suggest that the stress substances that promote mast cell accumulation, activation, and histamine release become excessive in pattern baldness. The accumulation of degranulated mast cells was found to define the baldness field, or typical horseshoe shape of pattern baldness. The migration and activation of mast cells in tissue are influenced by various hormones and signaling substances. For example, during stress, corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH, is secreted from the hypothalamus and can induce mast cell degranulation in a dose-dependent manner. CRH also activates the pituitary hormones, luteinizing hormone, or LH, follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH, which were found to increase the concentration and degranulation of mast cells. The hormone estrogen, which is increased in stress and aging in both sexes, was the most potent activator of mast cells tested. Estrogen inhibits mitochondrial respiration, reducing carbon dioxide production, promoting mast cell degranulation. Activating mitochondrial uncoupling proteins that dissociate ATP production from carbon dioxide production, generating more carbon dioxide and clearing lactic acid, were found to inhibit mast cell activation. Another way of thinking about it is that the biological functions of estrogen and histamine overlap, and reducing either one tends to reduce the other. A consequence of the hypoglycemia that an excess of estrogen can create is an increased concentration of free fatty acids in the blood. While the saturated fats tend to help terminate the stress reaction, the composition of released fat probably leans towards the polyunsaturated fats that the hormone-like prostaglandins are synthesized from. In 2012, Garza et al. Found that a type of prostaglandin, prostaglandin D2, was elevated in the scalps of balding men and inhibited hair growth. Prostaglandin D2 also promotes histamine release from mast cells and is involved in the pathology of many allergenic problems. For instance, asthmatics were found to have 12 to 22 times higher levels of prostaglandin D2 and 4 times higher levels of histamine compared to controls. Estrogen, free fatty acids, prostaglandins, mast cells, and histamine are involved in the development of fibrosis, or the abnormal progression of the normal formation of fibrous material between cells due to inflammation. In 1992, Jarowski et al. Found that a prominent feature of baldness was mast cell degranulation and the activation of fibroblasts, resulting in fibrotic thickening of the hair follicle. In another experiment, 412 people with pattern baldness, 193 men and 219 women, confirmed the presence of a significant degree of parafollicular fibrosis in at least 37% of cases. Moreover, balding men with higher levels of inflammation and fibrosis led to worse outcomes using the traditional hair loss remedy minoxidil compared to those with lower levels. Estrogen tends to increase the anti-respiratory pituitary hormone prolactin. In mammals, prolactin has been called the molting hormone for its well-known ability to shed old feathers, hair, or skin to make way for new growth. Like other mammals, humans appear to be subject to seasonal differences in hair growth, with evidence that both duration of hair growth and daily growth rates are greater in summer than winter. In fact, an old paper from 1947 explained that one constant feature of hair growth in man was that summer hair was more long-lived than winter hair. More recently, it was proposed that the hair follicle functioned as a specialized UV receptor responding to the nuances of seasonal light input. The marked seasonal effect of hair growth is so remarkable that it has been suggested that any new drug or treatment for baldness should be studied for at least a year to separate any effects from normal seasonal variations. Prolactin responds readily to cycles of light and darkness, temperature, nutrition, stress, and the feeding rhythm. An excess of prolactin is associated with the development of pattern baldness in both sexes. One way prolactin exerts a negative effect on hair is by reducing the intracellular level of cyclic AMP or CAMP, a secondary regulatory substance that is associated with normal cellular differentiation and function in hair growth. Prolactin also activates the enzyme that liberates arachidonic acid from cells for prostaglandin production. Moreover, alterations in mood can sometimes be attributed to higher prolactin levels, and might be another aspect of the so-called balding personality that I have mentioned previously. Prolactin tends to rise with another adaptive hormone that activates mast cells, parathyroid hormone. Both parathyroid hormone and prolactin decrease the concentration of carbon dioxide, which helps stabilize mast cells. Thyroid hormone is the master regulator of carbon dioxide, and in sufficient quantities, carbon dioxide inhibits an excess of both prolactin and parathyroid hormone. My perennial argument for the last few years has been that pattern hair loss means that something is wrong. A non-technical way of viewing the problem might be that the balding person is perpetually experiencing the effects of a winter metabolism, or a chronic light deficiency, lower vitamin D level, higher local levels of estrogen, histamine, cortisol, and prolactin, some degree of insulin resistance, hypertension, higher circulating free fatty acids, higher levels of the inflammatory prostaglandins, deranged calcium metabolism, and a reduced resting pulse rate and body temperature. Another way of looking at those facts is that red light, thyroid, calcium, vitamins D, K2, and A, sugars, salt, aspirin, caffeine, niacinamide, and maybe even a small dose of an antihistamine drug like cyproheptadine would be simple, cheap, and effective therapies for protection against the inflammation, fibrosis, and maladaptive stress reactions associated with pattern baldness. The heavy focus on androgen hormones and the genes as causes of baldness have led people to believe that pattern hair loss is a compartmentalized problem rooted in vanity that has nothing to do with their metabolism or lifestyle. Confusion about the role of androgens probably relates to testosterone's conversion into estrogen during metabolic stress, and that dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, like DHEA, can increase to buffer the effects of metabolic stress, for example, as an anti-estrogen. That's it for me. Please hit that like button if you're on Facebook if you enjoyed the article, and also leave any comments or criticisms below. I'll try to get to them as best as humanly possible. Check out the Facebook page for daily content, and it's a wealth of information. And also, again, you can read all the references to this article on DannyRoddy.com. Thanks for listening. I sincerely appreciate the listenership and all comments and criticisms. You guys are the best, and I appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.